As was stated, the title of this course primarily is The Life of the Messiah, with the subtitle From a Jewish Perspective. Now, generally speaking, in most Christian schools where there happen to be a Bible institute or a Bible college or a seminary, whenever the professor textbook begins to deal with the historical backgrounds of the Gospels and New Testament studies, they invariably deal only with the Greek and Roman backgrounds. That's very helpful for certain segments of the New Testament, like the latter part of Acts, like Corinthians, Ephesians, Galatians, and so on. The life of Jesus does not play itself out within the framework of a Greek or Roman culture, but a Jewish culture, and a very specific type of Jewish culture, that of first century Israel. He tells Zechariah, in spite of his age, he will sire a son. And in verse 13, when that son is born, he should name him John. That's a very anglicized form of the name. His name in Hebrew was Yochanan, and Yochanan means Jehovah is gracious, or the grace of Jehovah. Jehovah is gracious, or the grace of Jehovah. That is the actual meaning of the name. And with this name, he's announcing the coming of a new age, a new dispensation. And he says several things about John. First of all, he shall be great in the sight of the Lord. That'll be John's position before the Lord, one of greatness. How great he was ending up going to be, we'll see, because of how Jesus will evaluate him a bit later. Secondly, he shall drink no wine nor strong drink. He must totally abstain from anything having to do with alcohol, anything from the grape. Now, he was not told to abstain from wine because he was John the Baptist. That's not the reason. Rather, it was to be a Nazarite from birth. Now, generally speaking, the Nazarite vow was a voluntary vow one took for a set period of time. But three people in biblical history were called to be Nazarites from birth. First of all, Samson, who was unfaithful to his vow. Secondly, Samuel, who was faithful to his vow. They have a third person, Yochanan, John. And that's the reason for total abstention. Thirdly, he shall be filled with the Holy Spirit from his mother's womb. To be filled means to be controlled by the Spirit. He'll be with Spirit's control even when he's still in the womb of his mother. Fourthly, many of the children of Israel shall he turn unto Lord their God. He'll begin a repentance movement, a back to God movement, to get the people ready, have a group ready to accept the Messiah once he identifies who the Messiah will be. Fifthly, he shall go before his face in the spirit and power of Elijah. And we'll see several correlations between John and Elijah throughout the Gospels. Here's the first one. He'll come in the same power and spirit as Elijah the prophet. And like Elijah, he'll have a special ministry to the believing remnant of that day. And finally, in the verse 17, to make a people ready for the Lord, for him. His purpose to have a group ready to accept him as Jesus the Messiah, what John clearly identifies who the Messiah is going to be. So here Zechariah has been given some tremendous good news. But he finally is able to speak in verse 18, whereby shall I know this from an old man, and my wife is stricken in years. He raises a question, how can I know that this is true? It's a question which arises out of unbelief. And so the angel gives him a rather unique sign. Since he spoke a word of a question of unbelief, he will speak no more until the promise is fulfilled. And now he's stricken to be a mute. He'll stay a mute until the day that John is circumcised. When you're having a conversation with an angel, that takes some time, much longer time than it takes to burn some incense on the hot coals. And people outside in verse 21 were waiting for him, wondering why it was taking so long. Eventually he came out, but he can't speak anymore, could tell them nothing of what happened to him inside. And people recognize something happened, but they cannot know what happened. But when he finished his 2-week course of actions in verses 24 and 25, he returned to his wife, and shortly thereafter she conceives. And now she hides herself for 5 months, saying, the Lord has taken away my reproach, because in biblical times there was nothing more negative than a barren woman who could not produce children. Not such a terrible thing in our day, but it was considered a very terrible thing in biblical times because it was cutting off the husband's line. And now that reproach had been taken away that she was pregnant. Okay, we come to paragraph 5, the Annunciation of the birth of Jesus to Mary. Now, verse 26 of Luke 1 says, now in the 6th month, meaning 6 months since Elizabeth got pregnant with John, so the age differential between John and Jesus is a 6-month period. The same angel that appeared to Zechariah to inform him he'll be the father of Messiah's forerunner is now sent to Mary to tell her she was going to be the mother of the Messiah. Her name actually was Miriam, the same name as the sister of Moses. And the Greek even says Miriam, but when you go from Greek to Latin to English, Miriam became Mary. And basically, Gabriel's message contains 5 elements. First of all, the incarnation would be in a man. God himself will become a man for this purpose. Secondly, this man's name is to be Yeshua. Yeshua was the actual Hebrew name, not Jesus, which is the anglicized form of the name. And Yeshua comes from the Hebrew root meaning to save. Yasha, to save. He's given this name, as the angel will tell Joseph later, because he will save, he will Yivashah, his people from their sins. He calls him Yeshua because he will Yivashah, his people from their sins. And while this was a fairly common name, by the way, in first century Israel, for this one, it carries a meaning that he alone is going to fulfill. Thirdly, as to his essential nature, he will be great, characterized by greatness. Fourthly, he will be the Son of God. And then fifthly, he'll be the one to fulfill the Davidic covenant, God's covenant with David. Again, the early paragraphs connect him with the Jewish covenants. Now, when God made his covenant with David, he promised David four eternal things. First of all, an eternal house or dynasty. Secondly, an eternal throne. Thirdly, an eternal kingdom. And fourthly, an eternal descendant. And the eternality of the house, throne, kingdom is guaranteed because the seed of David culminates in one who is himself eternal, the Messianic God-man. And all 4 eternal elements come out in Gabriel's message. For example, the word throne. Look at the end of verse 32. The Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. Next verse, the word house. He shall reign over the house of Jacob forever. Word kingdom, of his kingdom there shall be no end. And again, the eternality of the house and throne and kingdom is guaranteed because the seed of David culminates in one who is himself eternal, the Messianic God-man. And so in verse 32 is called the Son of the Most High. And in verse 35 is called the Son of God. Now she also raises a question in verse 34, how shall this be, seeing I know not a man? It's not a question as to how can I know this will be true, a question of doubt, which was voiced by Zechariah. Her question has to do with how can this come about since I am a virgin. And the answer is in verse 35, the Holy Spirit shall come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, also thou which is born shall be called holy, the Son of God. And the reason this will be the case is that the Holy Spirit will be energized, will energize one of her eggs. As a result, what is born of her is going to be holy. It will be the Son of God. There's some people teaching today that she was only a surrogate mother, that it was not God did not use her egg to produce the Messiah, simply planted a fetus inside her womb, and she was only a surrogate mother. The problem with that view is that it destroys the concept of the seed, because for him to be the Messiah must be of the seed of Adam, of the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the seed of David, and so on. And so you don't have the option of her being merely a surrogate mother because he must have a direct bloodline. Adam, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, David, and so on. So that's a thing to actually negate his messiahship, not authenticate his messiahship. Another thing that we should note is a teaching that began with a very popular radio Bible teacher in the previous generation who was by training a medical doctor and then went into ministry. He began teaching that the necessity for the virgin in birth was that the sin nature is transmitted through the father and not through the mother, and therefore to protect Jesus from inheriting the sin nature of Adam, that's why he had to be born only of her, not of him. But the Bible nowhere teaches that that's the case. And in fact, the sin nature is transmitted through both the father and the mother. Sometimes the Bible focuses on the father, but sometimes on the mother, as in Psalm 51, "In sin did my mother conceive me." What protected Jesus from inheriting the sin nature was not the lack of a human father. God was not suddenly stuck with only one way of doing things. There are certain advantages to omnipotence. One of the advantages is you can accomplish the same thing in many different ways. If he wanted to, he could have produced a sinless child using both the male seed and the female egg. But he chose to do it this way because he chose to do it this way. That was his own free will. And furthermore, it would be the means of authenticating his messianic claims in keeping with Isaiah chapter 7:14, one of the prerequisites of his messiahship. What protected him from inheriting the sin nature of Mary is what's found here in verse 35, the overshadowing of the Holy Spirit. It also says, because of this overshadowing, therefore, what for? For that reason, that which is born shall be holy, and the Son of God. And again, he points out the 6th month in verse 36, the 6th month since Elizabeth got pregnant. Now in verse 38, Miriam puts herself in the safekeeping of God's hand so well she might for 3 reasons. First of all, she's already betrothed to Joseph, and the Mosaic law was if a woman is found pregnant during her betrothal period, she's viewed as being unfaithful and must be stoned to death. She had to trust the Lord she would not be stoned to death. Secondly, when in times of Jewish history, when they were not carrying out the death penalty, a betrothed woman found pregnant would be totally ostracized in the Jewish community, forbidden to have a Jewish wedding, forbidden to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, and she had to trust God concerning the reaction of the community. But thirdly, she had to trust God concerning her relationship to Joseph, a true concern because, as we'll see in paragraph 9, when Joseph hears about her pregnancy, he begins to follow a process of divorcement. Now, paragraph 6, the visit of Mary to Elizabeth. Miriam now knows that her cousin Elizabeth happens to be pregnant. And so she goes down to visit with her. And we read in verse 41, it came to pass when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leaped in her womb. Already inside the womb, the babe is already doing the job of the forerunner. He was controlled by the Spirit even within the womb of his mother. At that point, Elizabeth is filled with the Spirit herself, and she gives off a prophetic utterance. And she places a blessing upon Mary. Notice what she says about Mary in verse 43, the mother of my Lord shall come unto me. And she recognizes that Miriam, her cousin, is going to be the mother of the Messiah. And verse 45 says, and blessed is she that believed. And Mary is one who was characterized by believing. Her own husband, of course, was characterized by unbelief, which is why he was still a mute at this stage of his life. But the paragraph shows the extent of Miriam's faith and faithfulness. In paragraph 7, we have the Song of Miriam, the Song of Mary. And this shows the extent of Mary's spirituality, also the extent of her knowledge of Scripture. Her song parallels many ways with Hannah's song, and the song Hannah sung when she gave birth to Samuel. There are two parts to her song in verses 46 through 15. 46 to 15, she praises God for what God has done for her. And in verses 51 to 55, she praises God for what he will do for Israel. Now, in verse 47, she says, "My soul had rejoiced in God, my Savior." Now, what kind of people need saviors? Sinners. And verse 47 militates against the common teaching of Catholicism that she herself was in perpetual sinless state. She was not. She was spiritual. She was a strong believer. She was faithful, but she was not sinless and needed a Savior. The second part of the song, she points out the one that's coming is going to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant, God's promise to Abraham. Verse 54, "He had helped Israel his servant, that he might remember mercy he spoke unto our fathers, towards Abraham and his seed forever." Here again, the connection with the Jewish covenants. Verse 56 says, "And Mary abode with her 3 months, returned unto her house." So she stayed with Elizabeth for 3 months, the last 3 months of her pregnancy, and then left shortly before John was born. Notice that in paragraphs 5, 6, and 7, we've had the strong role of women. This is all Luke's gospel, and Luke again focuses on a special role of women in Messiah's life. And here are 3 examples. We also have a 4th example now in paragraph 8, the birth of Yochanan, the birth of John. There's a principle I will begin mentioning now that we'll trace as we go through the Gospels over the next 2 weeks as well. What happens to the herald of the king will happen to the king. What happens to the herald will happen to the king. John is born, but in Jewish practice, a son is not named when he is born. A son is named on the day of his circumcision. And so the day of his circumcision comes, when she's asked what will be the son's name, she says the name is going to be Yochanan, John. Now, the common Jewish practice nowadays is that Jewish families name their children after a relative that's passed away. In first century Israel, however, it was permissible to name your child after any relative, whether he was dead or alive. But the problem here is this, in verse 61, "And they said unto her, There is none of your kindred that's called by this name." And so they named the child Yochanan, when contrary to Jewish practice of that day. And while Yochanan, John, was a common Jewish name also in first century Israel, nobody in her family, nobody in his family had such a name, and therefore contradicted Jewish tradition to name him this. And what they wanted to do is to name John after his father. So his name would have been Zechariah, son of Zechariah. And when the mother insists his name will be Yochanan, they try to go over her head. In verse 62, they made signs to his father what he would have him called. As it says, they made signs to his father. That shows not only was he a mute, he was also deaf. He was both deaf and mute. Otherwise, they were simply able to verbalize their question and not have to make signs. He, of course, at this point cannot tell them what the name should be. So he asks for a writing tablet in verse 63 and writes, "His name is Yochanan, his name is John." And that's an act of obedience on his part, recognizing he's doing something that contradicted Jewish practices of that day. At that point, the curse that was placed upon him is removed, and now he's able to speak again. And in verse 65 and 66, again, the general population in this vicinity recognize something supernatural is going on. They don't quite know the exact nature of what is happening. In verse 67, the Father is now filled with the Holy Spirit, and he gives off a prophetic utterance. Also in two basic parts, verses 68 through 75. 68 through 75, he speaks about the Messiah. And in verses 76 to 80, he speaks about the John himself. And here again, there is a connection with the Jewish covenants. First of all, the Davidic covenant, look at verse 69. He has raised up all salvation for us in the house of his servant David. Then the Abrahamic covenant in verse 73. God which he swore unto Abraham our father. And also new covenant in verse 77. To knowledge of salvation unto his people in the remission of the sins, the promise of the new covenant of Jeremiah 31 through 34. 31 through 34 of Jeremiah 31. But here again you have the place you have the play upon the words of the meanings of the names Elizabeth and Zechariah. Again, Zechariah, God remembers. Elisheva, Elizabeth, the oath of God. Look at the second line of verse 72. Second line of verse 72. And to remember his holy covenant. There you have Zechariah. Next line, the oath, which is sworn to Abraham our father. There you have Elizabeth. Again, God remembers his oath, his covenantal oath to Jewish people. As for John, John is going to be like the morning star. Like the morning star signals the coming of day. By the same token, he will be the forerunner of the Messiah and the herald of the King. And because Luke is recording these events, not only is this concerned about women, but also about Gentiles. And so in verse 78, because the tender mercy of our God, whereby the dayspring from on high shall visit us, to shine upon them that sit in darkness and shadow of death, and to guide our feet in the way of peace. Notice the change of pronouns. To shine upon them that sit in darkness and shadow of death, a reference to the Gentiles. Because in Isaiah chapter 8, in Isaiah chapter 9, the Gentiles were living in the shadow and darkness of death because they did not have the light of divine revelation. To them that live in darkness and shadow of death, upon them the messianic light will shine, and to guide the Jewish our feet in the way of peace. This was coming to benefit both Jews and Gentiles. Now verse 80, and the child grew and waxed strong in the spirit, and was in the desert till the day was shown unto Israel. Early in his life, we don't know how early, how young he was, he went into the desert area of the wilderness of Judah. And there he would grow up to manhood. Now this activity in the land, in the deserts of Judah, would separate him from the Judaism of that day. It would separate him from the Judaism of that day. And so when his message finally went public, it was different than the message of the Judaism of that day. Now, paragraph 9, the Annunciation of the birth of Jesus to Joseph. Now we switch over to Matthew's account, and here Matthew tells us the story from Joseph's perspective. And the emphasis on this paragraph is specifically on the virgin birth, and that's pointed out 3 times. First of all, second line of verse 18, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Second time is in verse 23, where he quotes Isaiah 7:14, which shows how the way Isaiah 7:14 was understood in the first century Jewish context. And then verse 25 says, even after the birth of Jesus, he knew her not until she had brought forth a son. So even after the marriage ceremony, there was no sexual relationships between the two until the child was born. But the way the phrase reads also means that once the child was born, they did have relationships. And in fact, she produced 6 more children minimally, maybe more than 6, but at least 6 more. We'll see that in a later paragraph. Now, when he hears about the pregnancy, assuming she's been unfaithful, he could make her into a public example, but choose not to do so. He simply is going to do everything privately, and the legal divorce was writing a bill of divorcement and handing it to the woman, and the divorce is finalized. But the message of the angel to Joseph is 3 things. First of all, to fulfill the marriage vow. To go ahead and to fulfill the marriage vow. Secondly, to believe her story, to believe her that she was never unfaithful. And thirdly, all is according to plan, in accordance with the prophecy of Isaiah 7:14. This is the way the Messiah was supposed to be born. In verse 21 also specifies, you will call his name Jesus, Yeshua. As Mary was not told this, Joseph is, because it is he that shall save his people from their sins. That brings to paragraph 10, small g in your outline, the birth of the king. Now, based upon what Luke tells us in his gospel, and based upon what Matthew tells us in his gospel, and based upon what we know from historical sources like Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, we're able to pinpoint fairly accurately the actual year that he was born. We can deduct this from 4 specific clues. The first clue is based upon the year that Herod died. He dies in the year 4 BC. And the Gospels are quite clear that Herod was living when he was born. So since Herod dies in 4 BC, that tells us that he was born sometime before the year 4 BC. The decree of the days of Quirinius mentioned in this paragraph were issued in the year 8 BC. And Luke's Gospel makes it quite evident that he was born after the issuing of this decree. Because of this decree, they had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And so that gives us a 4-year parameter that he was born somewhere between the year 8 and 4 BC. The third clue comes from Josephus. The third clue tells us that Herod left Jerusalem in the year 5 BC, moved to Jericho. He spent the last year of his life in Jericho, never to come back to Jerusalem again, and in Jericho is where he died. When the wise men meet with Herod, the wise men meet with him when still in Jerusalem, and so the connection between the wise men and Herod had to come sometime before the year 5 BC, either that year, before that year, at least before he left for Jericho. And the fourth clue coming in Matthew's account, we'll see a bit later, by the time that the wise men and Herod met, Jesus was already 2 years old. Now, putting these 4 clues together, we can conclude he was born between the year 7 and 6 BC. In other words, Christ was born between 7 and 6 before Christ. Sounds like a contradiction because of some earlier miscalculations. Now, as to why they would have to travel for taxation purposes, keep in mind this was not income tax per se. In other words, that could have been paid in Nazareth. This was land taxes. Apparently, because of the house of David, they did still have some ownership of property in the Bethlehem area, and that would be the purpose for the traveling down into Bethlehem for that purpose. Now, paragraph 11, Annunciation to the shepherds. The verse 8 says, "There were shepherds in the same country abiding in the field, keeping watch by night over the flock." Around Christmas time every year, in front of many church yards and lawns, in front of many private homes and so on, you have certain things erected. I'll come back to that point later. But also over on radio, Christian radio and TV, you always have some people coming up to preach their favorite Christmas sermon, which is, according to verse 8, he could not possibly have been born on December the 25th, because you would not have shepherd and sheep out in the field in the month of December. Now, lost count how many times I've heard people make such a statement. Anytime you hear someone make such a statement, it gives only one fact away. That speaker's never been to Bethlehem in December. I lived in Israel for several years. I spent more than one December day in the Bethlehem environments. There are sheep and shepherds all over the place. It's a very good time for the sheep to be out there. Unlike America here, that receives rain in all 4 seasons, in Israel, the rain is fixed to a specific period of time. And the rains begin to fall at the end of October. They'll fall in the months of November, December, January, and February. Will begin to peter out in March and die out by mid-April. From mid-April to mid-October, no rain falls. And by the 1st of October, the hills of Israel have been burned dry by the sun. Once the rains begin to fall in October, by December, the whole nation has a carpet of green. Even the Negev desert has a carpet of green. It's a great time for the sheep to be out there. So those of you who use verse 8 against the December 25th day, they're basing their conclusions on what people may do up in Montana in the month of December. That says nothing about what people may do in Bethlehem. Now, mind you, I'm not arguing in favor of a December 25th date. I'm only saying verse 8 cannot be used against it. Now, again, we have enough information today to determine he was born somewhere between the year 7 and 6 BC. We do not have enough information to know when during the year he was born. We simply don't know. He very well may have been born on December the 25th, or he may have been born on July the 4th in anticipation of the American Independence Day. We don't know when during that year he was born. But more significant what happened on this occasion. In verse 9, the Shekinah glory appears in one of its more familiar Old Testament forms, in the form of light. An angel also appears for the purpose of interpreting the appearance of the light. An angelic message to the shepherds is 3 things. Number 1, do not be afraid of what you are seeing. Secondly, what this shows is that a Savior has just been born. Now, Israel has had many saviors in their history. The book of Judges, the judges of that book were all saviors. What makes this one different? That's his 3rd point at the end of verse 11. This one is Christ the Lord. This is the Messianic Savior. And now these shepherds are instructed to go find the child, but there'll be many babes in Bethlehem. How could they know they found the right one? And verse 12 says, and this is the sign unto you. The word sign by itself does not always require the miraculous, but minimally requires something unusual, something out of the ordinary to serve as a sign. And the 2 elements in the sign, number 1, you'll find the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, and number 2, lying in a manger. Now I'll take these individually in reverse order. The fact that the baby is lying in a manger tells the shepherds not to look into private homes, but look inside stables. But stables were not separate buildings like the Western farmers have. But caves throughout in the hill country of Judah, where Bethlehem is located, would be used for housing animals on bad weather days. It was not a bad weather day, they could be kept outside. And so look among the stable caves, and being shepherds by profession, they would know what these stable caves are. He's using their profession to point out to finding these caves. Now, why was he born in a stable cave? As paragraph 10 shows, that when they came into Bethlehem looking for better accommodations, there's no room for them in the Holy Day Inn. And so they had to find different accommodation. What they found was a stable cave. But it's not the totality of the clue. The clue also says you'll find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. That's not merely baby cloth. The same wording is used of burial cloth. You'll find the baby wrapped in burial cloth. Now, why burial cloth? Because interspersed among the caves were the caves used for burial purposes. So in the stable caves, in niches in the wall, you can still see to this day, they would store burial cloth. If a person died within the town, they would bring the body out, wrap the body up in strips of cloth from the cloth stored in the stable caves, and then taken either to be buried in a different cave or in a cemetery below the ground. Because he was born in a stable cave, Joseph and Mary had to make use of that which was most readily available, which was burial cloth, and the symbolism should not be missed. On the first day of his life, he's wrapped with the same kind of cloth to wrap him again the last day of his life with burial cloth. And that shows the purpose of his birth. All of us here were born to live. This one was born to die, and it's signified by being wrapped in burial cloth. At this point, in verse 13, a host of angels become visible with a twofold message in verse 14 concerning God. Glory to God in the highest, concerning man, and let peace among men in whom he is well pleased. Many of our popular Christmas hymns, while they rather nice sound, are not always accurate biblically. And one such hymn book says, "Hark, the herald angels sang." Notice it does not say they sang it in verse 13, they merely said it. It was a proclamation made but not put to music. Now, I have nothing against music. I enjoy listening to music of various kinds, especially Messianic style music and Jewish music. I also enjoy other types of music as well. I was once asked if God ever sings. My answer was that I don't know if God ever sings, but if he does, it must be in three-part harmony. But that was not the case in here. As a result of these two clues, they're able to find the right child. In the verses 15 through 20, we have the first recorded Jewish worship of the Messianic King, initiated, notice, by means of the Shekinah glory. Now, verse 19 says, Mary kept all these sayings, pondering them in her heart. And Luke is the one who records this from the woman's side of things, and later on she will reveal these things to Luke. Now in the outline we come to point 3, his infancy and childhood, comprising paragraphs 12 till 19. And in paragraph 12 we have the circumcision. And as was with John, what happens to Herod will happen to the king. All they already know what the name is. They do not officially give him the name until he's 8 days old. When 8 days were fulfilled for circumcising him, his name was called Jesus, Yeshua, which was so called by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. Now, circumcision was commanded under 2 Old Testament covenants. First of all, the Abrahamic covenant, and later again by the Mosaic covenant. But not unless they carry the same meaning or persons involved. The Abrahamic covenant, the circumcision was intended for Jews only, or those to be part of the household of Israel. As circumcision, the Abrahamic covenant was a sign of that covenant and a sign of Jewishness. In the Mosaic covenant, it was obligatory for both Jews and Gentiles, so those Gentiles who wish to partake of the covenantal blessings would have to undergo circumcision. It was the means of submission to the law. That's why Paul wants the Galatian Gentiles to submit to circumcision. They have to keep the whole law, not just this one commandment. And he was circumcised under both covenants, the Abrahamic covenant, which made a sign of his Jewish identity, and then the Mosaic covenant, the means of submission to the law. With Messiah's death, the Mosaic covenant has come to an end. Today there is no basis for circumcising anyone, either on the basis of Jews or Gentiles, on the basis of that covenant, the Mosaic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is an ongoing eternal covenant, which still requires even Jewish believers today to circumcise their sons on the 8th day. So people condemn Paul for circumcising Timothy. The Bible itself makes no such condemnation. Now in Acts 15, he would not allow the circumcision of Titus. In Acts 16, he himself inaugurates the circumcision of Timothy. What's the difference? Timothy had Jewish origins and Titus did not, which put Timothy under different covenantal obligations. One more thing about circumcision, it shows the faith and obedience of the parents, not the child. Again, shows the faith and obedience of the parents, not the child. If at the age of 8 days the child had a choice to make, he'd probably choose to forgo the experience. That's one reason why baptism is not the antitype to circumcision. Baptism is to show faith and obedience to the one being baptized, not the parents. And so in the Bible, the antitype to circumcision of the flesh is the circumcision of the heart, not baptism. Okay, paragraph 13, the presentation. Verse 22 specifies this happens 40 days after he is born. In the Mosaic law, if a woman gave birth to a baby girl, she's unclean for 80 days, and then she undergoes the cleansing process. If she gives birth to a son, then she's unclean for 40 days, and undergoes the process of cleansing. Because also a firstborn son, she goes there for two basic reasons. The first purpose is to the ceremonial purification of the mother. And the offering she provides in verse 24 and 25 is a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One was used for a sin offering and one was used for a burnt offering. But the fact that she offers a bird shows their economic status, because you're only allowed to offer birds if you could not afford anything better. This shows they're on the poverty level. That fulfills, for example, Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, as the 11:1 prophesies, Messiah appears only when the mighty house of David has been reduced to a stump, to what it was in Jesse's day. The second purpose is for the redemption of the firstborn, because the firstborn of humans, the firstborn of animals, belong to God. And therefore, for the kosher animals, they would be sacrificed. Unkosher animals, there'd be a substitute to sacrifice, and for a firstborn of males, there'd be the payment of a price. As the purpose of this visit, to cleanse the mother and to provide the redemption of the firstborn. But here they have an encounter with two individuals. So again, also Luke's account, giving us Romans and Gentile perspective. The first one is Simon in verse 25, who was the righteous and devout, looking for the consolation of Israel. He was a member of the remnant of that day, a believer, and God had revealed to him that no matter how old he might get, he will not die till he sees the Messiah personally. He recognizes in his 40-day-old baby the fulfillment of that promise. So now he's ready to die, and says in verse 29, "Now let your servant depart, O Lord, according to your word in peace, for mine eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples." Now keep in mind, he was not speaking English, he wasn't speaking Greek, he was speaking Hebrew. There's a play upon words here, because the play upon words has to do with mine eyes have seen your salvation. And again, Yeshua, in Jesus in Hebrew, Yeshua means salvation as a name. As a noun, you just add another syllable, Yeshua, but the same root as Yeshua. So mine eyes have seen your Yeshua, your Jesus. It knows that he is coming to benefit the same two groups that Zechariah sang about in verse 32. Number one, a light for revelation to Gentiles. Again, the Gentiles were those sitting in darkness and the shadow of death. Upon them the messenger light will shine. Then secondly, in the glory of your people Israel. Up to now, all this has been positive, but now he has something negative to say to Mary. In verse 34, "Behold, this child is set for the falling and rising up of many in Israel, for a sign that is spoken against." And the point is, as a result of this one's coming, he'll result in being a new point of division in the Jewish family. For those who believe are rising, for those who don't believe are falling. He'll prove to be the stone of stumbling and the rock of offense, and one against whom people will speak. He says, yea, a sword shall pierce through your own soul. The thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. And the sword will begin to pierce when she sees, in paragraph 61 to 64, the leaders of Israel rejecting him. And it will pierce its deepest when she sees him hanging on the cross. Yet the death of Jesus is essential that the hearts of people could be revealed. The second encounter is with a woman, as Luke will report. In verses 36 to 38, there was one Anna. Anna is the Hellenized form for the Hebrew Hannah. She was a prophetess, and she was of the tribe of Asher. Notice what tribe she's from, Asher. This is supposed to be one of those so-called 10 lost tribes. She's now lost. She knows where she is. And the concept of 10 lost tribes is simply a myth, and Jewish people today come from all 12 tribes. Notice how old she is. She's over a century old, because she had been a widow for 84 years. A widow for 84 years. She was married for 7 years previously to that. And so by this point of time, she's over a century old. And she also recognizes in this 40-day-old baby the Messianic person. And the verse 38 spoke of him, told them they were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem to the believing members of the remnant. Now we come to his infancy, small scene, the paragraphs 14 through 16. I'll try to close off with these. In paragraph 14, his infancy in Bethlehem. Now again, around Christmas time, every year people erect these little idolatry centers known as nativity scenes. They look somewhat the same. There's a bull, and it's supposed to be born, but no Jew in the first century recognized it to be that. There were no such barns in first century Israel. And then there would be 3 people in or outside the barn: Joseph, Mary, Jesus, sometimes with halos, sometimes no halos. Sometimes Jesus is still in the manger, sometimes on Mary's lap. Facing these holy 3 are the Jewish shepherds we talked about previously, and on this side you have 3 kings. In the next few moments, we shall be destroying these nativity sets. The fact is, the Jewish shepherds and the 3 kings never met each other. The events are separated by about 2 years in time. Another popular Christmas song is "We 3 Kings of Orient are," and the 2 mistakes just in the first line. First of all, we 3, but notice we don't know how many there were. At least 2, the word is plural. Maybe 2, maybe 20, maybe 200, maybe 2,000, we don't know. Enough of them were there to cause the whole capital to be stirred with excitement. That implies more than just 2 or 3. This says we 3 kings, but not called kings anywhere in the passage. They're called magi, or wise men, but it's a word that means astrologer. What we have here is an unknown number of Gentile astrologers coming from the east, from Mesopotamia, from Babylonia, to Jerusalem with the question, where is he? Is born the King of the Jews? And this raises a bunch of questions, such as, being Gentiles, how would they even know about a messianic concept? Even knowing about the birth of a Jewish king, why would they want to come worship him? After all, there were Jewish kings in the Old Testament, and Babylonian astrologers in the Old Testament didn't want to worship Jewish kings then. Why now? And does this passage really authenticate the practice of a form of Christian astrology that the Bible forbids any such dabbling? So let's answer these questions. First of all, how did they know? And the first clue is by the star they saw in the east. And the basic rule of interpreting the Bible is simply this. We always interpret the Bible literally, unless there's something in the context that tells us we cannot take it that way. And there are 5 things about the star that tell us it's not an ordinary star. First of all, the star is called his star. Notice the possessive pronoun at the end of verse 2. His star, a possessive pronoun. This was uniquely Messiah's star in a way that's not true of any other star that he himself created. This is his private star. Secondly, the star appears and disappears on at least 2 or more occasions. Minimally twice, appears, disappears, reappears, disappears. Maybe more than that, but minimally 2 times. Thirdly, the star moves from east to west, but fourthly also moves from north to south. And then fifthly, it comes down and hovers over one house in Bethlehem. Any little star that will hover over one house in Bethlehem will end up destroying this entire planet. It's like our sun. If our sun came down and hovered over one house here in Houston, this whole planet becomes history. It's not an ordinary star as we think of a star. Now, the Greek word for star has a root meaning which is radiance or brilliance. Radiance or brilliance. What we have here is what we had with the Jewish shepherds. The Shekinah glory in the form of a light up in the heavens, somehow signaling to them that this is the birth of the Messianic King. Now keep in mind that in those days, astronomy and astrology were not separate disciplines. If you looked at one, you looked at the other. You're a student of astronomy, you're also a student of astrology. These were not separate sciences. So anybody would notice a new light up in the heavens would be this men. This was their profession. And just as God used the profession of the Jewish shepherds to find the right stable cave, he now used the profession of these astronomers to notice the new light up in the heavens. But being Gentiles, how would they know about a Messianic King? All of the prophecies we have about the first coming, which there are quite a few, only one gives a timetable for the first coming, and that's Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Daniel 9, 24 through 27, Daniel spells out how many years will transpire before the coming of the Messiah. Unlike other books of the Old Testament, the book of Daniel was not written in Israel. It was written in Babylon. In fact, half of the book of Daniel is not Hebrew, the Jewish tongue, but Aramaic, the tongue of the Babylonians. As you read through the book of Daniel, you will see 2 things that become relevant to Matthew chapter 2. First of all, you will notice that Daniel became the head of the Babylon School of Astrology, not because he practiced astrology. As a loyal Jew to the Mosaic law, he would not dabble into astrology. He became the head only because of the lack of spirituality and insights of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar noticed these unique abilities that Daniel had. He made the assumption that Daniel was a superior astrologer. It made him the head of the whole Babylonian School of Astrology. But he never received any revelation from the stars, only the creator of the stars, the God of Daniel. The second thing is that one day Daniel saved the lives of all the other wise men of Babylon, because when they could not interpret the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, he sentenced all of them to be executed. Among the ones that were sent to be executed and arrested was Daniel. He asked an audience with the king and interpreted the king's dream, and by so doing he saved the lives of all the others. And no doubt, as a result, many of these turned away from worshiping the stars, began to worship the creator of the stars, the God of Israel. And they had in their possession a book written by the former head, Daniel, to give a timetable for the first coming. So they saw this new light up in the heavens, and the timing was right. They took that to be the sign that the king has been born. Now, while Daniel did give a timetable for the first coming, Daniel did not connect the Messiah with the concept of a star. For that, there is one other Babylonian connection. It's found in the book of Numbers, chapters 22 through 24. Numbers 22 through 24, the story of Balaam. Now, Balaam's reputation was, whomsoever Balaam blesses will be blessed, whomsoever he curses will be cursed. Because of his reputation, the king of Moab hired Balaam to curse the Jews, and 4 times He stood upon a high mountain who looked down upon the Jewish encampment. 4 times he opened his mouth to curse the Jews. All 4 times God took over his tongue. He ends up blessing the Jews instead. In these 4 blessings, he shows several messianic prophecies, including the one in Numbers 24:17. Numbers 24:17, a star will arise out of Jacob, whom the scepter of kingship will be given. It was Balaam who connected the Messiah with the star and kingship. And as a result, you had both the star connection and the kingship connection, and by profession, Balaam was an astrologer. And twice we're told he also came from Babylonia, Numbers 22 verse 5, Numbers 22:5, and Deuteronomy 23 verse Numbers 23 verse 4, Deuteronomy 23:4, Deuteronomy 23:4, and Numbers 22 verse 5. From the Balaam connection and Daniel connection, when they saw the light in the heavens, they took it out to be a sign and came to Jerusalem. Now, why Jerusalem? As this context shows that while they had the knowledge of Daniel, they didn't have the book of Micah. And Micah chapter 5 verse 2 prophesied Bethlehem, not Jerusalem, be the place of Messiah's birth. They did not know this. For them, the logical place for the Messiah to be born would be the Jewish capital, and that was Jerusalem, not Bethlehem. At Jerusalem they came, causing a stir that reaches the ears of Herod the Great. Now, for some reasons, he calls the wise men in verses 5 and 6. Now, he also calls in the Jewish leaders who tell them about the Micah 5:2 prophecy. And verse 7 says, and Herod privately called the wise men, learned of them carefully what time the star appeared. How long has it been since the star first appeared? As paragraph 15 points out, in verse 16, it appeared 2 years earlier. So again, by now, he was already 2 years old. For some reasons, he sends them to Bethlehem to find the child and report back to him. But as they head down for Bethlehem, how do you find 1 2-year-old? Do you go house to house, door to door? If you see one, how do you know it's the right one? Well, the star that previously disappeared now in verse 9 reappears. Lord, the star which they saw in the east went before them. It now moves north to south, till it came and stood over, literally in Greek, hovered over, where the young child was. No need to go house to house, door to door. The light came down to show them where the child was now living. And verse 11 says, and they came into the house, not a stable cave where the shepherds found him, now in a private home. And here in verse 11 you have the first recorded Gentile worship of the Messianic king. And both the first Jewish worship and the first Gentile worship was inaugurated the same way, by means of the Shekinah glory. Leave behind 3 types of gifts, each of which contains symbolic meaning. Gold is a symbol of kingship. He is a king. Frankincense is a symbol of deity. He is God. Myrrh is a symbol of death and sacrifice. The kingship is found in Daniel chapter 2. The frankincense, Leviticus chapter 3 verse 2. Leviticus chapter 3 verse 2. Leviticus chapter 5 verse 11. Leviticus 5:11. And the death and sacrifice, Mark 15:23. Mark 15:23. And John 19:39. John 19:39. The first line of the Christmas song again is not biblical. We 3 kings of Orient are. The last line is God and King and sacrifice. Now they were to report back to Herod, but in verse 12 they're warned by God in a dream not to do so, returned to Babylonia in a different direction. Now paragraph 15 is his infancy in Egypt. Now Matthew's theme of kingship is Herod's fear. Well, historically it's called Herod the Great. I call him Herod the Paranoid. In his older age, he became more and more paranoid, always afraid that somebody out there was trying to take his throne away. Because of his suspicions, he killed 3, maybe 4 of his own sons. He also killed his favorite wife, Mariamne, because of suspicions of conspiracy. Now, Caesar Augustus, who was Caesar in those days, once said, in light of Herod's actions, it was safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son. Herod was a nominal convert to Judaism, and so he did not eat pork. So if you're Herod's pig, you're in pretty safe hands. But to be Herod's son, that was an occupational hazard. And now he's concluded that there's a 2-year-old boy in Bethlehem conspiring to take his throne away. So he sends his army into Bethlehem to kill every male child from the age of 2 years. And why 2 years? Because verse 16 tells us that's the information he got from the wise men, how long the star first appeared to them. This is Matthew telling the story from Joseph's perspective. An angel appears to Joseph, warning him to flee the city. And so they flee into the land of Egypt, where they live for the next year or two. Now, I already know that they were on the poverty level. How would they get the money to travel and live there for that length of time? And that's from the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They finally have some resources. Okay, one more paragraph, paragraph 16. His infancy in Nazareth. Matthew's account, verse 9, says, when Herod was dead, that was about 1 to 2 years after this. Once again, Matthew tells the story. He informs us that an angel appears to Joseph, informing him to return to the land. Now, no single son of Herod got all of his inheritance, but it was divided among 3 of his sons, one of which was Archelaus, who received Samaria and Judea. As bad as Herod the Great was, Archelaus was considerably worse in many ways. In fact, at the time of his crowning, he had 3,000 Jews killed. It was done in the temple compound during Passover. Galilee was under the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, who was a milder man, and so Joseph chooses not to go back to Bethlehem, but to go back to Nazareth. And that creates a negativism later on, because while Judeans looked down upon Galileans, fellow Galileans looked upon the people from Nazareth. And the saying, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" was a common saying of that day. The rabbis used to say, if you want to get rich, go north. If you want to get wise, go south. There were no rabbinic schools in the Galilee at that period of time. That began only after the fall of the first Jewish revolt failed. All the rabbinic schools were in the Judea, and that's where you would get your wisdom. And so being from Nazareth would create a new negativism. Even one of his future disciples will say, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" There's one more thing I want to do, but I'm not going to do it right now, and that's to look again at paragraphs 14, 15, and 16. Notice how the different ways the New Testament quotes the Old. We'll pick it up with this point tomorrow evening.